breaking news alert on the television was loud enough to rattle the porcelain figurines my late wife had collected, but it was the ticker tape scrolling at the bottom of the screen that made my blood run cold. Not because I was surprised, but because I was disappointed. Constitutional crisis, the anchor announced, his voice trembling with that performative gravity they all learn in journalism school. Governor Thorne mobilizes the Texas National Guard. Federal oil reserves seized. The White House has yet to respond. I took a sip of my coffee. It was lukewarm and tasted faintly of the dish soap I hadn't rinsed out properly. It was the taste of retirement. Bill, for God's sake, can you turn that down? My son-in-law David was pacing the length of my living room. He was wearing a slim-fit navy suit that cost more than my first car, and his face was illuminated by the blue light of his iPhone. His thumbs were moving across the screen with the speed of a hummingbird's wings. "I'm trying to draft a rebuttal thread," David snapped, not looking up. "The sentiment analysis is tanking. We're down 6 points in the hourly tracking. Twitter is eating us alive. I need silence to think about the optics." I didn't turn the volume down. I turned it up 2 notches. "Optics," I muttered, mostly to the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. "You're worried about the lighting while the house is burning down." David stopped pacing. He looked at me with that familiar expression of exhausted pity. He was 35 years old, the Deputy Communications Director for the White House. And he looked at me, a 71-year-old retired history teacher, like I was a golden retriever that had just soiled the carpet. "It's not just lighting, Bill," David said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's the narrative. Governor Thorne is controlling the narrative. He's framing this as state sovereignty versus federal overreach. If we don't clap back within the hour, the algorithm cements his version of reality. But I wouldn't expect you to understand. You still buy physical newspapers." He went back to his phone. "Damn it, the hashtag Stand With Texas is trending. I need a graphic. Something punchy." I looked back at the screen. The footage showed armoured Humvees surrounding the salt domes of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in Freeport. Young men in camouflage were standing guard, rifles slung low. They looked nervous. They were kids, weekend warriors. I looked at Governor Thorne's face on the split screen. He was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who has placed a bet he knows the house can't cover. "It's a Fight 4, I said quietly. David paused. "What?" "Feint number 4, I repeated, staring at the governor's eyes. "Standard escalation protocol. He doesn't want the oil. He knows he can't refine it fast enough to make a difference in the market. He's seizing the physical asset to force a kinetic response from the president. He wants you to federalize the guard." David laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Bill, stick to your crossword puzzles. This isn't a game of Risk. This is complex geopolitical maneuvering. We have data analytics. We have focus groups. And yes, the president is preparing to federalize the guard. We're drafting the executive order right now. We're going to show strength. We're going to crush this insurrection before the evening news cycle." I set my coffee cup down on the coaster. I did it very carefully. "If you federalize the guard," I said, my voice steady, "Thorne will cut the colonial pipeline at the Beaumont Junction." David rolled his eyes. "He wouldn't dare. That's interstate commerce. That's domestic terrorism. He'd be arrested." "He won't cut it with a bomb, David," I said. "He'll cut it with a safety inspection. He'll claim he found a stress fracture in the main valve. He'll shut it down for emergency maintenance under state environmental protocols. He has the legal authority to pause operation for 72 hours pending review. I turned in my armchair to face him. Do you know what happens if the Colonial Pipeline stops flowing for 72 hours? David looked annoyed. Gas prices go up a few cents. We handle the PR. The East Coast runs out of jet fuel in 48 hours. I corrected him. Dulles, JFK, Newark. They all go dark. Then the diesel stops. The trucks stop. The grocery stores in New York and DC go empty in 3 days. Panic sets in. The stock market crashes. And Governor Thorne stands there and says, "I didn't do this. The president's aggression made me check the safety of our infrastructure." You make him a martyr, and you starve your own voters. David stared at me for a moment. Then he shook his head, dismissing the thought as the ramblings of a senile old man. That's a nice conspiracy theory, Bill. Really. You should write a blog. But I have to go. The Chief of Staff is calling an emergency war room session. I have to get to the White House. He grabbed his briefcase. His hands were shaking. I could see the sweat on his upper lip. He was terrified. He was a boy playing with matches in a dynamite factory. "David," I said, "don't federalize the Guard." "I don't have time for this," David shouted. He was cracking. "I have to go. The President is going to address the nation at 8 p.m. We are sending in the 101st Airborne if the Guard won't stand down. We are showing force. That is the strategy." He ran into the hallway bathroom. I heard the door lock. I heard the sound of him retching. The stress was eating him alive. He wasn't built for this. He was built for peacetime. He was built for polling numbers and ribbon cuttings. He wasn't built for the abyss. I looked at the TV. The chyron read, "White House prepares military response." They were walking right into it. Thorne was baiting them, and they were swallowing the hook, the line, and the sinker. I sighed. I stood up. My knees popped. The arthritis was worse when it rained, and it looked like a storm was coming. I walked into my study. It was a small room, lined with bookshelves that smelled of vanilla and decay. There were no pictures of my past life on the walls, no certificates, no photos of me shaking hands with Kissinger or advising Reagan in the Situation Room. Just books. Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, the collected works of Thucydides. On my desk sat an old laptop, an IBM ThinkPad from the early 2000s. It was heavy, black, and ugly. It had no Wi-Fi card. I had physically removed it. It was air-gapped. It was the only place I wrote. I sat down. I opened the lid. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light. I cracked my knuckles. I hadn't done this in 10 years. Not since the Crimea situation in 2014, when I sent a back-channel memo to a friend in the State Department that likely prevented a tactical nuclear exchange. I typed. I didn't use headers. I didn't use pleasantries. I didn't use adjectives. Adjectives are for poets. Verbs are for soldiers. Nouns are for leverage. The document was short. A single page. 5 bullet points. I typed with 2 fingers, hunting and pecking, but the speed was rhythmic. Clack, clack, clack. 1. The trap. Thorne seeks federalization. It legitimizes his narrative of occupation. He has already pre-signed their order to halt the Beaumont flow for environmental safety. Intelligence will confirm a suspicious movement of state troopers to the valve station at 1400 hours today. 2. The leverage. Do not threaten war. Threaten irrelevance. Thorne's power base is not the oil. It is the royalty checks sent to the West Texas land barons. He needs the price to spike to cover his state deficit. 3. The feint. Announce a federal emergency override not of the Guard, but of the EPA ethanol mandates. Flood the market with Midwest reserves. Drop the price of crude by $10 a barrel overnight. Bankrupt his donors. 4. The exit. Offer him a win. A joint safety task force to inspect the reserves. He gets to keep his men on the ground. You get the oil. He claims he forced the feds to care about safety. You claim you secured the asset. 5. The syntax. If he refuses, federalize the banking routing numbers of the Texas State Treasury, not the Guard. Freeze the state's ability to pay the very soldiers he mobilized. An army unpaid is a mob. I read it over. It was cold. It was precise. It was the Blackwell Doctrine applied to domestic idiocy. I pulled the paper out of the printer. The ink was fresh. I folded it once. I heard the bathroom door open. David was rushing toward the front door, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. I walked out to the hallway. David, I said. He spun around, his hand on the doorknob. Bill, I really have to go. I'm late. Take this, I said. I held out the folded paper. What is it? He looked at it like it was a used tissue. A grocery list? Give it to the Chief of Staff, I said. David let out a groan of frustration. Bill, I cannot walk into the Oval Office and hand the Chief of Staff a note from my father-in-law. Do you know how insane that sounds? Tell him it's from the janitor, I said. David froze. He looked at me. He blinked. The janitor? He started to laugh. It was a hysterical, high-pitched giggle. That's your secret code name? The janitor? Oh, Bill, that's rich. You really are losing it. Just give it to him, David, I said. My voice dropped. It wasn't the voice of the history teacher anymore. It was a frequency lower than that. A rumble. If you want to keep your job, if you want to keep your pension, give him the paper. Something in my tone made him stop laughing. He looked at my eyes. For a second, just a split second, he saw something there that scared him. He saw the predator behind the cataracts. He snatched the paper from my hand. Fine, he snapped. I'll throw it in his trash can personally. Happy, ecstatic, I said. He slammed the door behind him. I walked to the window. I watched him get into his Tesla, watched him speed away, weaving through the suburban traffic. He was driving a computer on wheels to a meeting of children. I went back to the kitchen. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I waited. 2 hours passed. I sat in my armchair watching the news. The situation was deteriorating. CNN reported that shots had been fired near the perimeter of the reserve. No casualties, but the escalation was happening faster than I predicted. The president was scheduled to speak in 45 minutes. My phone rang. Not the house line. My cell phone. A prepaid burner I kept in the kitchen drawer. Only 3 people had the number. 2 of them were dead. I looked at the caller ID. It was David. He must have called the house, got no answer, and remembered the emergency number I gave him, in case the house burns down. I picked it up. Hello, David. Bill. His voice was a whisper, a ragged, terrified wheeze. Bill, where are you? I'm in the living room, I said, watching the end of the Republic. It's quite the show. David paused. I could hear background noise, phones ringing, people shouting, the distinct chaotic hum of the West Wing bullpens. I gave him the note. And? I didn't want to, David stammered. I was going to trash it, but the meeting was a disaster. The president was screaming. The generals were pushing for airstrikes on the pipeline junctions. It was madness. So I panicked. I put the paper on the Resolute desk. I smiled. A bold move for a communications director. The chief of staff grabbed it. David whispered. He was about to tear it up. But then he read the first line. Then he read the second. I waited. He went pale, Bill. I've never seen a man lose colour that fast. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. What did he say? He asked me where I got it. I told him. I told him what you said. I said it was from the janitor. David's breathing was shallow. Bill, the room went silent. The president, he stood up. He told everyone to leave. The generals, the advisors, the press secretary. Everyone except the chief. And you, I assumed. He kept me, David said. He looked at me like I was a spy. He asked me if I knew what the Blackwell syntax was. And what did you say? I said I didn't know. I said you were just a retired teacher. Good boy. Bill! David's voice cracked. He's asking for you. The president is on the other line. He wants to talk to the janitor. He said the architect is supposed to be dead. I closed my eyes. The architect. It had been 20 years since anyone used that name. It was a name from another life. A life of shadow cabinets, back-channel diplomacy, and the quiet, brutal application of power. I had walked away from it when my wife got sick. I promised her I would leave the game. But the game never really lets you go. It just waits for you to get bored. Bill? David pleaded. Are you there? What do I do? Who are you? Put him on, David, I said. Put who on? The president. There was a fumble, a click, then a voice I recognized from 1,000 speeches. The leader of the free world. A man I had met once at a fundraiser when he was just a junior senator with a bad haircut and too much ambition. This is the president, the voice said. It was guarded, skeptical. Mr. President, I said. I didn't sit up. I stayed in my armchair. You're about to lose Texas. Who is this? The president demanded. How do you know that syntax? That memo style? It hasn't been used since the Clinton administration. It hasn't been needed since the Clinton administration, I said. Because people used to read the manual. The chief says you're the architect, the president said. He says you're the one who drafted the blockade protocols in '96. He says you're a myth. I'm a retired teacher, Mr. President, I said. I grade papers, and frankly, your administration is failing the midterm. The line was silent for a moment. The governor has threatened to cut the pipeline, the president said, his voice dropping the facade. He sounded tired. My generals say he's bluffing. He's not bluffing, I said. He has the state troopers at the valve station. Check your satellite feed. Sector 4. Coordinate roughly 30 degrees north. I heard the president relay the order. A pause. Then a gasp from someone in the room. They're there, the president whispered. 6 patrol cars. They have a welder. He's going to seal the valve, I said. He's not cutting it. He's welding it shut. That takes 3 days to fix. You lose the East Coast. My God, the president breathed. If we had sent the troops. You would have given him the excuse to strike the match, I finished. What do I do? The president asked. It was the question of a man who realized he was out of his depth. Read the memo, I said. Point 4, the exit. The Joint Safety Task Force? Give him the win, I said. Let him save face. He needs to look strong for his base. Let him stand next to you and announce that he secured the safety of the oil. You get the flow. He gets the photo op. Then, next month, when the spotlight moves, you audit his state energy commission and cut his federal highway funding by 40%. Revenge, the president murmured. Accounting, I corrected. And point 5? The president asked. Freezing the state treasury? That's the nuclear option, I said. Keep it in your pocket. But make sure he knows you have the button. Have your Treasury Secretary call his state comptroller in 10 minutes. Just ask a question about routing number compatibility. They'll get the message. Routing number compatibility, the president repeated. I could hear him smiling. It was the smile of a man who just found a loaded gun in his pocket during a knife fight. Sir, the Chief of Staff's voice came from the background. We have 5 minutes to air. Makeup is waiting. I have to go, the president said. But we need to talk. After this, I need you in DC. I don't travel, I said. My hip acts up. Then we'll come to you, the president said. David, are you there? Yes, Mr. President, David's voice squeaked. Get your father-in-law a secure line. A real one. Install a SCIF in his house if you have to. He is now the senior advisor for domestic strategy. Sir, David sounded like he was going to faint. That's an order, the president barked. And David? Yes, sir? If you ever treat him like a dinosaur again, you'll be the one scrubbing toilets in the Naval Observatory. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Understood, sir. Thank you, janitor, the president said. Good luck, Mr. President. Watch your left hand when you speak. You tend to chop the air when you're lying. Keep it flat. The line went dead. I put the burner phone on the table. I picked up the remote control. I unmuted the TV. The presidential seal appeared on the screen. The fanfare played. Hail to the chief. I leaned back. The armchair groaned under my weight. I looked at the coffee stain on the rug. I really needed to get that cleaned. The president walked out to the podium. He looked confident. He looked calm. He looked like a man who had a plan. My plan. I waited for David to come home. It was going to be an interesting dinner. The steam from my Earl Grey tea rose in a perfect, undisturbed column. It was the only thing in the room that was moving. The rest of the house was silent, holding its breath. Even the refrigerator seemed to have stopped humming, as if the appliances themselves understood that the next 10 minutes would determine whether they would have electricity tomorrow. I settled into the groove of my armchair. The leather was worn, moulded to the shape of my spine over 3 decades of watching history unfold, usually with a grimace. On the television screen, the seal of the President of the United States faded, replaced by the man himself. President Robert Sterling stood behind the podium in the East Room. He wasn't in the Oval Office. That was the first signal. The Oval is for reassurance. The East Room is for announcements. It is where you stand when you want to look like a CEO, not a father figure. He wore a blue tie, not red. Red is aggression. Blue is stability. Good evening, my fellow Americans, Sterling began. His voice was steady. He didn't look at the teleprompter. He looked down the barrel of the lens. Watch his hands, I whispered to the empty room. On the screen, Sterling's hands were clasped on the podium. He wasn't gripping the sides. Gripping implies tension. Clasped hands imply control. Tonight, we face a challenge in Texas, Sterling said. A challenge not of malice, but of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I echoed. Good. You're de-escalating the rhetoric. You aren't calling them rebels. You're calling them confused. Governor Thorne has mobilized the National Guard to secure the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, Sterling continued. He cites safety concerns regarding the federal management of these critical assets. He claims that the pipelines are at risk. The split screen showed Governor Thorne in Austin. He looked smug. He was waiting for the threat. He was waiting for Sterling to say, "Stand down, or I will send in the Marines." That was the fight Thorne wanted. It was the fight that would make him a martyr. "I take these concerns very seriously," Sterling said. Thorne's smile faltered slightly. "Safety is paramount," Sterling said. "Which is why, effective immediately, I am not federalizing the National Guard." Thorne blinked. The pundits on the bottom ticker froze. The Twitter feed that David had been panicked about stopped scrolling for a microsecond. "Instead," Sterling said, shifting his weight, "I'm signing an executive order declaring a national energy solvent emergency." "Here it comes," I whispered. "The pivot. To alleviate the pressure on the Texas infrastructure, which the governor has so rightly pointed out is fragile," Sterling said, injecting a microscopic amount of venom into the word fragile, "I am authorizing the immediate release of 50 million barrels of ethanol and Midwest crude from the Northern Reserve. Furthermore, I am suspending all federal mandates on biofuel mixtures for the next 6 months to ensure the American people have access to affordable energy." I took a sip of tea. It was perfect. "Checkmate," I said. On the screen, Governor Thorne was no longer smiling. He was leaning forward, listening to an aide who was whispering frantically in his ear. Thorne was a smart man, but he was a tactical thinker, not a strategic one. He was thinking about the soldiers at the gate. He hadn't thought about the market. By flooding the market with the Northern Reserves and suspending the mandates, Sterling had just crashed the price of West Texas Intermediate crude. "I am checking the futures market on my laptop right now," I narrated to myself. "Oil just dropped $7 a barrel. Thorne's donors, the land barons, the drillers, the people funding his re-election, just lost $100 million in 30 seconds. Additionally," Sterling continued, "to assist Governor Thorne in his noble effort to secure the safety of the pipes, I am establishing a joint federal-state safety task force." "The poison pill," I murmured. "Eat it, Thorne. It tastes like candy, but it kills you." "This task force," Sterling said, "will be composed of civilian engineers from the Army Corps and observers from the governor's own office. They will spend the next 6 months inspecting every inch of the reserve infrastructure. During this time, the facility will remain under state protection, paid for, of course, by the state of Texas." I laughed softly. It was brutal. It was beautiful. Sterling had just given Thorne exactly what he asked for. He gave him the protection of the facility. But by crashing the price of oil, he made the facility worthless. And by making it a state operation, he shifted the cost of the deployment, millions of dollars a day, onto the Texas budget. Thorne couldn't leave because he claimed it was unsafe. He couldn't stay because he was going bankrupt. He couldn't fight because the president hadn't attacked him. "Finally," Sterling said, looking down at his notes for the first time. This was the final nail. The one I had labelled the syntax in my memo. "To facilitate this cooperation, The Treasury Department will be conducting a routine audit of all state accounts linked to federal highway grants to ensure that the routing numbers are compatible with the new safety funding streams. Thorne went white. Even under the studio lights, I saw the blood drain from his face. Routing number compatibility. It sounded boring. It sounded bureaucratic. But Thorne knew what it meant. It meant the Treasury Secretary was currently hovering a finger over the freeze button. It meant that if Thorne didn't fold, the state of Texas wouldn't be able to process a single check. No payroll for the teachers, no payroll for the police, no payroll for the very National Guard soldiers standing outside the oil depot. I look forward to the governor's cooperation, Sterling said. God bless you and God bless America. The president turned and walked away from the podium. He didn't take questions. The screen cut back to the news anchors. They were stunned. A master stroke, Wolf Blitzer shouted, looking confused. The president has effectively de-escalated the crisis without moving a single soldier. Market reaction is swift, the financial correspondent yelled. Oil is plummeting. The Texas energy sector is in freefall. Governor Thorne is holding a press conference in... Wait. We are getting word that the governor has cancelled his press conference. I closed my laptop. He folded, I said. He'll issue a statement in 10 minutes. He'll say he welcomes the federal help and is scaling back the deployment to a skeleton crew. He'll declare victory, and then he'll spend the next year begging Washington to restore his highway funds. I finished my tea. The house was quiet again. I looked at the coffee stain on the rug. I rubbed it with the toe of my slipper. David, I thought, you better have taken notes. David didn't come home until 2 a.m. I was still awake. I was reading The Prince by Machiavelli. I found it soothing. It was honest about human nature in a way that modern self-help books never were. I heard the Tesla pull into the driveway. The electric hum was barely audible. The front door opened. David walked in. He looked like he had been through a war. His tie was undone. His shirt was rumpled. His expensive suit looked like he had slept in it. He walked into the living room and stopped. He stared at me. I didn't look up from my book. Rough day at the office? I asked. David didn't answer. He walked over to the sofa and collapsed onto it. He put his head in his hands. They asked me, David whispered. Who asked you what? The cabinet, David said, lifting his head. His eyes were bloodshot. After the speech, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, even the Vice President, they cornered me. They asked me who wrote the memo. And what did you tell them? I tried to lie, David said. I tried to say it was a collaborative effort from the comm shop, but the Chief of Staff... He laughed. He actually laughed in my face. David stood up. He walked over to the fireplace, then turned to face me. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe that I hadn't seen since the day he asked for my daughter's hand in marriage. The Chief of Staff started crying, Bill, David said. Frank Miller, the toughest man in Washington. He read the part about the routing numbers, and he started to cry. He looked at me and said, Only one man writes like this. Only one man knows how to weaponize a bank transfer like a cruise missile. David took a breath. He told me about 1996, David said. The Taiwan Strait crisis. He said everyone wanted to send the carriers. He said you sent a fax to the Chinese Central Bank regarding their currency peg, and the ships turned around. It was a telex, I corrected gently. Faxes were too easily intercepted. Why didn't you tell me? David's voice rose. Why do you live like this? You're a legend. You're the architect. You could be on every news channel. You could be making millions consulting. Instead, you're here, shouting at the TV and drinking cheap tea. I closed my book. I placed it on the side table. David, I said, sit down. He sat. He looked like a student in the principal's office. You work in communications, I said. You deal in optics. You deal in fame. You think power is the person standing at the podium with the lights on them. I leaned forward. That is not power, David. That is a target. I pointed to the window, to the dark street outside. When you are famous, you are fixed. People know where you are. They know what you want. They know how to hurt you. Fame is a liability. It restricts your movement. It forces you to act for the audience, not for the outcome. I tapped my chest. Influence is a shadow. Shadows can move. Shadows can change shape. A shadow can be in the room, and no one knows it's there until the lights go out. I don't want the credit, David. I want the result. But the governor, David stammered. Thorne, you destroyed him. He's finished politically. And no one knows it was you. Thorne knows, I said. Or he suspects. And that fear? The fear of an unknown enemy who can dismantle his life with a single page of text? That is more powerful than any press release. David looked at his hands. I felt useless today. I was tweeting hashtags while you were saving the country. You weren't useless, I said. You were the courier. The courier is essential. I want to do what you do, David said. I don't want to be the optics guy anymore. I want to be the mechanic. I looked at him. I saw the exhaustion, but I also saw the hunger. The crisis had stripped away his arrogance. It had humbled him. And humility is the first requirement for true strategy. I reached under my chair. I pulled out a stack of 3 books I had prepared earlier. I tossed them onto the coffee table. Thud. David looked at the titles. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Diplomacy by Henry Kissinger. The Discourses on Livy by Machiavelli. Read them, I said. Not the summaries, not the Wikipedia pages. Read the texts. I read Sun Tzu in college, David muttered. You read it for a grade, I said. Now read it for survival. Read Kissinger to understand how to build a house. Read Machiavelli to understand how to burn it down. And read Sun Tzu to know when to do which. David picked up the books. He held them like sacred texts. And David? Yeah? Delete your Twitter app, I said. If you're reacting, you've already lost. A strategist acts. He never reacts. David nodded. He stood up. Thank you, Bill, he whispered. I mean, thank you, architect. Don't call me that, I said, picking up my crossword puzzle. I'm just a retired teacher. Go to bed. You have a press briefing at 8 a.m. You have to explain why the president decided to collaborate with a traitor. David smiled. A tired, genuine smile. Good night, Bill. He walked up the stairs. I sat alone in the living room. The silence was heavy, but it was a good silence. The silence of order restored. I looked at the clock. 2:45 a.m. I stood up to turn off the lamp. Ring. The sound cut through the room like a knife. It wasn't my cell phone. It wasn't the house phone. It was the dusty, rotary phone that sat on the bottom shelf of the bookcase. The one that wasn't plugged into the wall jack. The one that ran on a hard line buried 6 feet under the foundation, encased in lead. I hadn't heard that ring in 12 years. I walked over to the bookcase. I moved a stack of National Geographic magazines. The red light on the base was flashing. I picked up the receiver. It felt heavy, cold. "Halloway," I said. The voice on the other end was distorted by encryption, but the cadence was unmistakable. "The Eagle has landed," the voice said. "The vitals are stable. The patient has recovered." It was Frank Miller, the Chief of Staff. "I watched the broadcast, Frank," I said. "He stuck the landing. Although he needs to work on his posture. He slouches when he lies." Frank chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "We missed you, Bill," Frank said. "The room was empty without you. We were running around like headless chickens until the note arrived." "You're out of practice," I said. "We need you back," Frank said. "Officially, the President wants to name you Special Envoy or National Security Advisor. Name the post. We'll clear the confirmation." "No," I said. "Bill, the world is getting darker. Russia, China, the cyber threats. We need the architect." "The architect is retired," I said. "He likes his garden. He likes his crossword puzzles. And he likes being invisible." "What if we need you again?" Frank asked. "What if the sky falls?" I looked out the window. The streetlights were humming. The world was asleep, safe because of a single page of text typed on an air-gapped laptop. "If the sky falls, Frank," I said. "You know the number." "Thank you, architect." "Don't call this number again unless the sky is actually falling," I said. "And Frank?" "Yes?" "Tell the President to stop wearing blue ties. It makes him look like a weatherman. Tell him to wear grey. It makes him look like iron." "I'll tell him. Goodbye, Frank." I hung up the phone. Click. I stared at the device for a moment. Then I put the National Geographic magazines back on top of it. I walked to the window. David was upstairs, sleeping. The country was stable. The oil was flowing. I turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. I smiled in the dark. I prefer the shadows. It's where the real work gets done.